The grand halls of the Scifi war chamber echoed with the sharp clicks of the queen's claws against the stone floor. Queen Verexa sat on her throne, her massive form covered in gleaming black kitten, her golden eyes filled with amusement. She listened as her generals, towering, armored creatures with curved horns and razor-sharp mandibles, spoke of a strange new enemy. The humans resist. My queen, one of her warlords reported, his deep voice carrying a hint of unease. Their defenses on the outer colonies are stronger than expected. Verexa let out a low, hissing laugh. Humans, she repeated, as if tasting the word. Frail, soft-skinned creatures that barely stand taller than a Xalthari hatchling. Do you truly believe they can stop us? The warlords hesitated. Their queen was powerful, wise, and undefeated. The Xalthari Empire had conquered dozens of species, bending them to its will. No enemy had ever resisted for long. But these humans, they were different. One of the warlords, General Korak, stepped forward cautiously. My queen, they fight with an unusual level of coordination. They do not rely on brute strength, yet they overwhelm our forces in ways we cannot predict. Even their weakest warriors show no fear. And their weapons. Verexa raised a hand, silencing him. She leaned forward, amusement dancing in her eyes. You speak as if these creatures are something to be feared. Korak hesitated but remained firm. I only wish to warn you, my queen. The humans do not fight like the others. They do not surrender. They adapt. The queen laughed again, a sharp, echoing sound. Adapt? They are fragile. Without their machines, they are nothing. What can mere flesh and bone do against the might of the Xalthari? She turned to her royal strategist, a smaller but highly intelligent Xalthari named Sirak. Tell me, how long will it take to break these humans? Sirak, unlike the others, did not look entirely convinced of the queen's confidence. He had studied the human battles. He had seen their strange ways, their unpredictable tactics. But he knew better than to question the queen directly. With your permission, my queen, I recommend we proceed with caution, Sirak said carefully. Humans have already destroyed several of our forward bases. Their ability to use terrain, to set traps, and to fight in both space and ground combat is remarkable. Verexa's mandibles twitched in amusement. Caution. Against creatures that bleed so easily. No, I will not waste time. We will crush them. She stood, her towering form casting a long shadow over the war chamber. Prepare the invasion fleet. I will lead the assault myself. The warlords exchanged uneasy glances. The queen had never needed to step onto the battlefield before. Her presence alone was a symbol of power. If she was going, it meant she wanted to witness the humans' defeat with her own eyes. A few days later, the Xalthari war fleet arrived at a human-controlled colony world, Vandros IV. It was a small but strategically important planet, home to a military base and thousands of human settlers. The queen watched from the bridge of her flagship, a massive war cruiser bristling with weapons. Through the large viewing window, she saw the planet below, its surface covered in lush green forests and deep blue oceans. It looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Begin the attack, she ordered. Her fleet moved into position, unleashing a devastating bombardment on the planet's surface. Explosions lit up the sky as human defense turrets fired back. Fighter ships scrambled to intercept the Xalthari forces, engaging in chaotic aerial battles. Verexa smirked. It was exactly as she expected. The humans were trying to hold their ground, but they were no match for Xalthari firepower. Then, something unexpected happened. The human defenses, instead of collapsing, started to shift. Their forces fell back, not in retreat, but in a controlled withdrawal. They lured the Xalthari into narrow canyons and dense forests, places where their heavy war machines could not maneuver easily. On the ground, human soldiers fought in small, fast-moving squads. They did not charge blindly like other species that Xalthari conquered. Instead, they struck with precision, targeting weak points, sabotaging supply lines, and using ambush tactics that confused the larger, stronger Xalthari warriors. Verexa watched the battle unfold, her amusement slowly fading. Her warriors were struggling. A single human fighter, just one, had taken down an entire Xalthari squad using nothing but explosives and a well-placed sniper shot. Another group of humans had somehow managed to hijack a Xalthari dropship and turn its weapons against its own fleet. For the first time in her long reign, Queen Verexa felt something she had never known before: doubt. These humans, she murmured, her golden eyes narrowing. They are more resourceful than I expected. Cyrock, standing beside her, bowed his head slightly. My queen, shall we deploy additional forces? Verexa hesitated, then shook her head. No, she would not be frightened by mere trickery. Send in the elites, she commanded. Let us see how long these humans can truly last. But deep inside, a small voice whispered something she did not want to admit. What if the humans were not the weaklings she thought they were? What if they were something far worse? What if they were warriors? The air on Vandros IV was thick with smoke and fire. The once pristine sky was now filled with the dark trails of burning wreckage. Xalthari warships loomed above the planet like monstrous shadows, their cannons raining destruction. On the ground, explosions shook the earth as the alien invaders advanced. Queen Verexa stood on the command deck of her personal warship, her golden eyes fixed on the battlefield below. She expected to see humans running in fear, their cities crumbling, their defenses broken. But instead, she saw something that made her mandibles twitch in irritation. The humans were fighting back. Not just fighting, but winning battles. Verexa's clawed fingers tightened around the hilt of her ceremonial blade. She had ordered her elite warriors, the most fearsome soldiers of the Xalthari Empire, to lead the ground invasion. These were creatures twice the size of a human, armored in natural exoskeletons as strong as steel. They wielded energy blades that could cut through starship hulls and plasma rifles capable of vaporizing flesh in an instant. And yet these humans, these weaklings, were standing their ground. The battle raged across Vandros IV's central military base, where Captain Elias Work crouched behind a smoking barricade. His armor was scuffed and dented, his pulse rifle nearly overheated from constant fire. Around him, his squad of Terran Defense Forces soldiers held the line, ducking behind cover as green plasma bolts seared past them. Hold your positions, Rourke barked. Make every shot count. A Xalthari warrior, nearly 8 feet tall, roared as it charged toward them, energy blade raised high. Rourke didn't panic. He took a steady breath, aimed, and fired. His shot hit the alien's knee joint, one of the few vulnerable points in its armor. The warrior stumbled, and before it could recover, another soldier tossed a grenade under its feet. A sharp explosion sent the creature crashing to the ground, unmoving. The Xalthari were powerful, but they weren't invincible. Rourke's radio crackled. Captain, this is Lieutenant Vega. We've set charges at the southern entrance. When they push in, we blow it. Copy that, Rourke responded. Lure them in, then detonate. This was the difference between humans and the species that Xalthari had conquered before. Brute strength wasn't their weapon. Strategy was. Up in orbit, Queen Verexa watched in growing frustration as the battle reports came in. Her elite forces were struggling. Humans used hit-and-run tactics, striking fast before fading into the ruins. They set traps that turned Xalthari strength against them. Entire squads were lured into narrow corridors where they couldn't use their size advantage. Others fell victim to human snipers, hidden in the rubble, taking them down with perfect shots. One particular report caught her attention. My queen, a commander spoke over the communication channel. A group of human soldiers infiltrated our forward operating base. They disabled our comms relay and stole critical supplies before escaping into the tunnels. We did not expect such an attack. Verexa's mandibles clenched. You are telling me that a group of flesh and bone creatures outmaneuvered an entire Xalthari garrison? The commander hesitated. Yes, my queen. They are unpredictable. That word again, unpredictable. The queen's claws tapped against the metal armrest of her throne. She had underestimated them, but she would not make the same mistake twice. On the battlefield, Captain Rourke and his team sprinted through the burning wreckage of a Xalthari dropship they had just ambushed. They had taken down 3 enemy patrols and now had valuable intelligence on enemy positions. We need to regroup at the command post, Vega said, reloading her weapon. But I don't think they're gonna let us walk out of here. As if on cue, the ground shook violently. From the smoke, a squad of Xalthari juggernauts emerged, heavily armored warriors carrying plasma cannons. Their golden exoskeletons gleamed in the firelight as they took slow, deliberate steps forward. Ah, hell, Rourke muttered. They brought the big guys. The Xalthari juggernauts didn't charge like the others. They knew humans were tricky. Instead, they spread out, their cannons whining as they charged up devastating energy blasts. We're pinned, Vega said through clenched teeth. Rourke's mind raced. A direct fight was suicide. They needed a distraction. Fast. His eyes flicked to a damaged power generator nearby, sparks flying from its ruined casing. A plan formed in his mind. Vega, give me a charge. We overload that generator. It'll blow half this street apart. Vega grinned and pulled an explosive charge from her belt. Now you're thinking like a soldier. They worked fast, placing the charge as plasma bolts slammed into their cover. As soon as it was set, Rourke grabbed the remote detonator and turned to his team. On my mark, we move. 3, 2, 1, go. The team sprinted just as the explosion erupted behind them. The power generator went critical, unleashing a massive shockwave that tore through the Xalthari squad, sending them flying like ragdolls. Rourke didn't look back. Move, move, move. The humans disappeared into the ruins, leaving the burning wreckage behind. From orbit, Queen Verexa's claws dug into the armrest of her throne as she received the latest report. Her juggernauts were gone. The humans had escaped again. For the first time, the queen felt something she had never felt before. Not anger, not irritation. It was something deeper. Doubt. She had laughed at the idea of humans being warriors. She had called them fragile, weak, unworthy of being called an enemy. But now, as she watched her forces fall back for the first time in Xalthari history, she could no longer deny the truth. Humans were not weak. They were dangerous, and she had just made the mistake of underestimating them. The Xalthari Empire had never known fear. They had never known failure. Every species they encountered had fallen within days, their resistance crushed beneath the might of the Queen's armies. But now, things were different. The humans had not only survived, they had fought back. And they were winning. Queen Verexa stood in her war chamber aboard her flagship, her golden eyes narrowed as she studied the battle reports. Each update brought more bad news. Entire Xalthari divisions had been lost on Vandros IV. The human defenses, instead of crumbling, had adapted. They had learned the weaknesses of the Xalthari warriors and turned them against them. Her elites, her juggernauts, her war tacticians, all had failed to break the humans. This is unacceptable, Verexa hissed, her mandibles clicking in frustration. The warlords standing before her shifted uncomfortably. None of them dared to speak. None of them dared to admit what was becoming clear. The Xalthari Empire was losing ground. One of her most trusted generals, Korak, finally stepped forward. His exoskeleton was cracked from battle, his usually proud stance weighed down by exhaustion. "My queen, we must consider retreat," he said carefully. The human's heir. Verexa's claws slammed into the table, leaving deep marks in the metal surface. "You speak of retreat. You, one of my finest generals, would suggest that we flee from a species that should have been wiped out already." Korak lowered his head. They are unlike any enemy we have faced. Verexa leaned forward. Explain. Korak hesitated, then answered. They do not fight for survival alone. They fight with purpose, with strategy, and they do not fear us. Fear, that was the key. Every species that Exaltheri had conquered had feared them. It was why they won so easily. The moment fear took hold, the battle was over before it even began. But humans were different. On the surface of Vandros IV, Captain Elias Rourke stood atop a ridge, watching as the battle raged below. The sky was filled with smoke and fire, but where the Exaltheri saw chaos, he saw opportunity. Their defenses had held. The Exaltheri had thrown everything at them, wave after wave of warriors, heavy artillery strikes, and aerial bombardments. But the humans had endured. And now, it was time to strike back. Rourke tapped his communicator. All units, prepare for counteroffensive. Command is green lighting Operation Iron Fang. A voice crackled through the radio. It was Lieutenant Vega. About time. We've been waiting to punch these bugs in the teeth. Rourke smirked. Then let's not keep them waiting. The Exaltheri expected their enemies to hide. But instead, the humans attacked. Across the battlefield, mechanized assault walkers, towering bipedal war machines, began their march. Their plasma cannons and railguns tore through Exaltheri ranks like they were paper. The Queen's warriors, so used to being the hunters, now found themselves hunted. From the shadows, human special forces emerged, striking with precision. They targeted Exaltheri supply lines, sabotaged ammunition depots, and hacked into enemy communications. And then came the drones. Exaltheri warriors roared in frustration as they swiped at the small, fast-moving machines, only to be blown apart by well-placed explosives. They had never fought a species like this, a species that did not rely on sheer strength but on strategy, on innovation, on relentless determination. Queen Verexa watched in horror as the battle reports continued to pour in. Her warriors were falling back. Her forces were breaking. She gripped the edges of her throne, her claws trembling with rage. This is not possible, she whispered. Sarak, her royal strategist, stepped forward cautiously. My queen, the humans, they do not fight the way we expected. They have no single pattern, no single strategy. They are unpredictable. Verexa finished, her voice filled with venom. Sarak nodded. Yes, my queen. We must consider that this war is different. Verexa closed her eyes for a brief moment. Never in her life had she known defeat. Never had she known uncertainty. And yet now, as her empire's greatest warriors fell one by one, she felt something new. It was a cold, creeping sensation at the edge of her mind. Doubt. She turned her gaze back to the burning planet below. This war was not over. Not yet. But for the first time, Queen Verexa wondered, what if the Exaltheri Empire had made a terrible mistake? The battlefield on Vandros IV had changed. What was once a desperate defense had become a counterattack. The humans, outnumbered and outgunned, had turned the tide of war, not with sheer power, but with strategy and resilience. And for the first time in Exaltheri history, their forces were retreating. Queen Verexa stood on the bridge of her flagship, her golden eyes locked on the burning planet below. The humans had resisted longer than expected, but now they were pushing back. She gripped the edge of her command throne. This was not how the invasion was supposed to go. The Exaltheri were conquerors, the strongest warriors in the galaxy. No species had ever stood against them like this. Yet here the humans were, defying every expectation. Her warlord stood in silence, waiting for her orders. Korak, her most experienced general, had a deep wound across his exoskeleton from a recent battle. He had seen the humans up close. He had fought them, and he had survived. They are unlike any species we have faced, Korak admitted. His mandibles twitched in frustration. They do not break under pressure. They do not surrender. They are relentless. Verexa's claws tapped against the armrest of her throne. And what do you suggest? Korak hesitated, then spoke carefully. We must change our tactics. The humans are unpredictable. We need to be as well. The queen narrowed her eyes. She did not like admitting that the humans had forced them to adapt, but ignoring the truth would mean defeat, and she would not allow that. After a long pause, she finally spoke. Then we will show them what the Scifi are truly capable of. On the battlefield below, Captain Elias Work reloaded his rifle and wiped the sweat from his forehead. His armor was battered, his body sore, but there was no time to rest. The battle was far from over. The humans had pushed back the Scifi forces, forcing them to retreat to their drop zones. But Rourke knew one thing for certain. They would return. And when they did, they would be more dangerous than ever. His comms crackled. Captain, we've intercepted a transmission. Lieutenant Vega reported. The Queen is preparing a new assault. They're bringing in heavy reinforcements. Rourke exhaled sharply. Of course, they weren't done yet. Do we have an estimated time? He asked. Less than 2 hours. Rourke looked around at his men, soldiers who had fought against impossible odds and survived. But how much longer could they hold? He activated his communicator. This is Captain Rourke to all human forces. We've held the line, but the Scifi aren't finished. They're regrouping, and they're coming back stronger. A moment of silence followed. Then voices from across the battlefield responded. We're ready, Captain. They hit us hard. We hit them harder. We're not going anywhere. Rourke smirked. The Queen could send everything she had. The humans would not break. The Scifi reinforcements arrived like a storm. Massive war beasts, towering mechanized walkers, and heavily armored shock troopers descended onto the battlefield. This was no longer just an invasion. It was an extermination attempt. Queen Verexa watched from her flagship, her golden eyes gleaming. Let's see how long the humans can last now. Her commanders believed that this would be the final strike, that the humans would finally fall. But they had not learned their lesson. Because when the storm hit, the humans did not run. They'd fought back harder than ever. Rourke's forces unleashed hell. The moment the Scifi landed, human artillery rained down on them. Missiles, EMP blasts, and railgun strikes tore through their war beasts before they could even reach the front lines. The Scifi walkers, designed to crush enemy forces beneath their massive legs, found themselves targeted by human explosives, toppling like fallen giants. And the shock troopers, the best warriors of the Scifi Empire, were met with human special forces who outmaneuvered them at every turn. Queen Verexa's mandibles clenched in frustration as the reports came in. They were still winning. The humans were still standing. On the battlefield, Rourke fired his rifle at a Scifi warrior, dropping it before it could reach one of his soldiers. He turned to Vega, who was setting up a detonator near a damaged enemy walker. Tell me you've got that thing ready, he shouted. Vega grinned. Just about. Before she could finish, a massive explosion sent both of them flying. Rourke hit the ground hard, his ears ringing. When he looked up, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A Scifi warlord, bigger and stronger than any enemy they had faced before, was charging straight for him. Its golden armor was nearly unbreakable, and its plasma blade hummed with deadly energy. Rourke tried to move, but he was too slow. The warlord raised its blade. And then a sniper shot rang out. The warlord stumbled, its armor pierced by a high-powered round. Before it could recover, a second shot hit its weak point, sending it crashing to the ground. Rourke turned to see a human sniper, perched on a ruined building, giving a thumbs-up before disappearing into the shadows. Rourke let out a breath. Humanity's finest. From her flagship, Queen Verexa watched in disbelief. Her forces had doubled their strength, yet they were still falling. She clenched her fists, her mind racing. This was not possible. Unless... Her eyes narrowed. Maybe it wasn't just that the humans were strong. Maybe it was something more, something deeper, something that no other species had ever had. Verexa's claws tapped against her throne. It was time to understand the enemy. And to do that, she would have to do something she had never done before. She would have to face them herself. The war on Vandros IV had reached its most brutal phase. The humans had held their ground. They had survived wave after wave of Zalthari attacks. Now they were not just defending, they were winning. But Queen Verexa would not accept defeat. For the first time in her reign, she would step onto the battlefield herself, and she would end this war with her own claws. Aboard the Zalthari flagship, the command chamber was silent. Every warlord, every general, every strategist in the room stood motionless, waiting for their queen's decision. Verexa's golden eyes were locked on the holographic battlefield map. The Zalthari forces were scattered, struggling to hold their positions against the relentless human counterattacks. The humans had proved stronger, smarter, and more resilient than any species they had ever faced. She exhaled slowly. There was only one option left. Verexa turned to her warlords. "Prepare my war armor. I am going down there myself." A murmur spread through the chamber. Korak, her most trusted general, stepped forward. "My queen, you must not." She silenced him with a sharp glare. "The humans have defied the will of the Zalthari Empire. They have humiliated our warriors. If I do not show them the full power of our people, then we are already defeated." She walked past them, her steps heavy with determination. "I will crush their spirits myself." Korak bowed his head. He did not agree, but he would not disobey. "As you command, my queen." Within minutes, the queen was inside her personal drop pod, clad in golden war armor, crafted from the strongest Zalthari metals. Her blades gleamed, and her energy shield pulsed with power. As the pod's doors sealed, she took one last breath. Then, with a thunderous boom, she was launched toward Vandros IV. On the battlefield, Captain Elias Work scanned the smoke-filled horizon. The Zalthari were falling back, but he knew better than to celebrate too soon. Something didn't feel right. His earpiece crackled. "Sir, we're detecting a high-speed drop pod entering the atmosphere. It's bigger than normal." Rourke's stomach tightened. "Give me visuals." A nearby drone fed footage to his visor. He saw the massive pod cutting through the sky, flames trailing behind it. It wasn't just any Zalthari landing craft. It was a command pod. Rourke muttered under his breath. "That's not good." The pod slammed into the battlefield with a ground-shaking impact. Dust and debris exploded outward, forcing human soldiers to cover their faces. For a long moment, there was silence. Then the pod doors hissed open. A tall, imposing figure stepped out, her golden armor gleaming in the firelight. Her mandibles clicked as she surveyed the battlefield, her piercing eyes locking onto the humans. The Zalthari queen had arrived. Rourke clenched his fists. "So," he muttered, "she finally decided to come down herself." The queen's wrath. Verexa moved like lightning. One moment, she was standing still. The next, she was among the human soldiers, her blades cutting through their ranks with terrifying precision. Plasma rounds bounced off her energy shield. Explosions shook the ground, but she barely noticed them. She was a force of nature. Her warriors, inspired by her presence, rallied. The Zalthari who had been retreating now charged forward, roaring in fury. The battlefield had shifted again. The humans had fought against Zalthari warriors. But now, they were fighting a Zalthari god. Rourke gritted his teeth as he fired his rifle. His bullets pinged off the queen's armor, barely slowing her down. "We need more firepower," he shouted. Vega's voice came through his comm. "We've got a railgun emplacement 2 clicks north. Should be able to punch through her defenses. Then let's move." Rourke signaled to his squad. They dashed through the battlefield, dodging plasma fire and explosions. But Verexa saw them, and she wasn't going to let them escape. She leaped through the air, landing directly in front of them, her blades humming with energy. "You have fought well, humans," she said, her voice like steel. "But your resistance ends here." She lunged. The duel. Rourke barely had time to react. He rolled aside as her blade sliced into the ground where he had just been standing. The impact sent shockwaves through the earth. Verexa turned toward him, faster than he expected. She swung again. He barely blocked with his combat knife, the sheer force sending him skidding backward. She was too strong, too fast. But Rourke had one advantage. He didn't have to win. He just had to stall her long enough. He activated his comm. "Vega, tell me that railgun is ready." 30 seconds, she replied. "Make it 15, he growled. Verexa's mandibles twitched in amusement. "You fight with courage, but courage alone is not enough." She charged again. The final shot. Rourke did everything to dodge, but Verexa was too fast. She slammed him against a metal barricade, her blade pressed against his chest. "It is over," she declared. Rourke smirked. "You sure about that?" Verexa frowned. Then she heard it, a low electrical hum growing louder behind her. She turned just in time to see the railgun cannon fire. A high-velocity round tore through the air, striking her directly in the chest. The impact sent her crashing backward, slamming into the ground with a force that shook the battlefield. For a long moment, everything was silent. Then, Rourke pushed himself up, coughing. He looked at Verexa's fallen form. Her armor was cracked. She was still breathing, but she wasn't getting up. He tapped his comm. Target hit. Vega let out a relieved laugh. "Damn, that actually worked." Rourke exhaled. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time, he saw something no one had ever seen before. The Xalthari Queen had fallen. And that meant something bigger than victory. It meant that Xalthari Empire was vulnerable. The battlefield was silent. For the first time in Xalthari history, their queen had fallen. Queen Verexa lay on the ground, her golden armor cracked, her body motionless. The railgun blast had sent her flying, and now she struggled to breathe. She had never felt this kind of pain before. She, the ruler of the most feared warriors in the galaxy, had been defeated by humans. The thought burned her pride like fire. Around her, the Xalthari warriors hesitated. Their queen, their symbol of strength, was on the ground. And for the first time, doubt crept into their hearts. The humans were not just resisting anymore. They were winning. Captain Elias Rourke stood a few meters away, his rifle raised, staring at the fallen queen. His breath was heavy, his body sore from battle. "Is she dead?" Vega's voice crackled through his comm. Rourke stepped closer. Queen Verexa's chest moved slowly, her breath shallow but steady. "No," Rourke muttered. "She's still alive." A part of him wanted to end it right there. She had killed so many of his soldiers. She had led the invasion that turned Vandros IV into a war zone. If she died, that Xalthari might retreat for good. But something stopped him. She had come to this battlefield believing that humans were weak, believing that she could break them. And now, she was the one on the ground. Killing her would make her a martyr. Letting her live would make her a lesson. Rourke tapped his comm. "Get me a secure transport unit. We're taking her prisoner." Vega sounded shocked. "We're what?" "She's worth more alive than dead." There was a pause, then Vega sighed. "Copy that, sir. Transport en route." The Xalthari's choice. The Xalthari warriors stood frozen. They watched as their queen was lifted onto a human transport vehicle, her armor still damaged, her weapons taken away. Their unbeatable queen was a prisoner. The humans could have killed her, but they didn't. General Korak, who had fought alongside Verexa for years, clenched his fists. He had never feared an enemy before. But the humans, they were different. They fought with fire in their souls, with a strength that could not be measured by weapons or numbers. And now, Korak had to decide. Would they continue this war? Or would they accept the truth that the humans were not prey? They were equals. Aboard the human warship, Verexa opened her eyes. She was in a containment chamber, her body restrained by energy cuffs. The room was cold, sterile, unfamiliar. She had been captured. The realization sent a wave of fury through her. A door hissed open, and Captain Work stepped inside. He stood tall, his expression unreadable. "You're awake," he said. Varexa's mandibles twitched. "You should have killed me." Work crossed his arms. "Maybe, but that wouldn't change anything." Verexa narrowed her eyes. "You think taking me prisoner will stop the war?" Work sighed. "I don't know, but I do know this. You thought humans were weak. You thought we would break." He stepped closer. "And yet here you are, defeated." Verexa's claws flexed. "This war is not over." Work tilted his head. "Are you sure about that?" He tapped a control panel, and a hologram appeared. It showed the Scifi fleet still hovering above Vandros IV. But they weren't attacking anymore. They were waiting. "Your soldiers don't know what to do," Rourke said. "They followed you because they believed you were invincible. But now they've seen the truth." Verexa stared at the screen. She saw the hesitation in her warriors, the uncertainty in their movements. The Scifi had never lost a war until now. Rourke folded his arms. "You can keep fighting. Keep sending your people to die." Or, he let the silence stretch. "You can end this." Verexa remained silent. Rourke turned to leave. "Think about it." The door hissed shut, leaving her alone with her thoughts. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure what to do. The turning point. Back on the battlefield, General Korak received a transmission. It was from Verexa. Her voice was calm, steady. "This war is over." The words shook him. The humans had done the impossible. They had forced the Scifi to surrender. He turned to his warriors. "Stand down." The Scifi dropped their weapons. For the first time in Scifi history, they admitted defeat. The war on Vandros IV was finally over. For the first time in their long history, the Scifi Empire had been defeated. Their queen, Verexa, was a prisoner aboard a human warship. Their warriors had laid down their weapons, and their fleet, once ready to destroy Vandros IV, now hovered in silence, uncertain of what came next. But even in peace, the battle was not truly finished. There were still decisions to make. Aboard the human warship, Queen Verexa sat in her containment chamber, her golden armor still cracked from the battle. The energy cuffs around her wrists hummed softly, a constant reminder of her captivity. She had never imagined this. She had believed in her empire's strength. She had mocked the idea that humans could be warriors. But now she had felt their power, seen their determination, and she could not ignore the truth. The door hissed open, and Captain Elias Rourke stepped inside. His uniform was still scorched from battle, his face bruised, but his eyes were steady. "Your army surrendered," he said simply. "Your fleet is waiting for your command." Verexa stared at him. "Do you expect me to beg for my life?" Rourke shook his head. "No, I expect you to lead." She narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" "You have a choice," Rourke said, stepping closer. "You can order your fleet to retreat, go back to your empire, and tell them the truth, that you lost." Verexa felt a sharp sting of humiliation at the words. "Or," Rourke continued, "you can make something out of this defeat." Verexa frowned. "Explain." Rourke leaned against the wall. "You thought humans were weak. You believed we would be easy to conquer. Now you know the truth." He gestured around. "Your empire could keep fighting, waste more warriors, burn more planets. But eventually, you'll face another enemy like us. And maybe next time, it won't end with a surrender. Maybe it will end with the Scifi's destruction." Verexa stayed silent, processing his words. He was right. The humans were not weak. The Empire could continue the war, but at what cost? How many more Xalthari warriors would die before they realized the truth? For the first time, Verexa saw a different path. "We are warriors," she said at last. "We do not submit to those we fight." Rourke nodded. "Then don't submit. Change." Verexa tilted her head. "Change. Use this loss to make your empire stronger," Rourke said. "Not by conquering, but by learning." Verexa's mandibles twitched in thought. The Xalthari Empire had never learned from its enemies, because they had never needed to. They had always won. But now, they had lost. Perhaps that meant it was time for something new. The fleet's decision. General Korak stood on the bridge of the Xalthari flagship, staring at the human warship on his monitors. The transmission from the Queen had come minutes ago. She had survived, and she had ordered the fleet to leave Vandros IV. Many warriors questioned the decision, but no one disobeyed. The Xalthari followed their queen not just because she was strong, but because she led them. And if she had chosen to retreat, then it was not defeat. It was strategy. Korak turned to the fleet commanders. "You heard the queen. We leave. Prepare the ships for jump." The fleet slowly turned away from Vandros IV. The humans watched in silence as the massive warships began to disappear into the darkness of space. The war was truly over, but something had changed in the galaxy. The Xalthari had changed. And soon, everyone would know it. 1 week later, the Council of Worlds. The news of the Xalthari defeat spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For centuries, the Xalthari had been seen as unstoppable, an empire that crushed any species in its path. But now, their queen had been captured. Their warriors had been defeated, and they had left a battlefield alive. For the first time, other galactic powers began to rethink their strategies. Some feared that the Xalthari would return stronger than before. Others wondered if the empire would collapse. But one thing was certain: humanity was no longer seen as a weak species. They had not only survived, they had made the Xalthari change their ways, and that made them more dangerous than anyone had imagined. A final meeting. On a distant station, Queen Verexa stood before a holographic projection of the Xalthari High Command. The warlords and elders of the Empire stared at her, some in shock, others in anger. "You surrendered," one warlord hissed. Verexa's eyes burned with determination. "I did what was necessary for our future." "We do not surrender," another elder said. "The Xalthari conquer." Verexa straightened. "Then perhaps it is time we evolve." The council fell silent. For so long, they had believed in one way of survival: war, domination, control. But now, their queen had seen another path. One where the Xalthari were not feared for their destruction, but respected for their strength. Verexa took a deep breath. The humans were not weak. They fought like no species we have ever faced. They endured everything we threw at them, and still stood tall. She leaned forward. "We must do the same. If we do not adapt, if we do not grow, then one day, we will face an enemy we cannot defeat." She looked at each warlord. That day nearly came. Do not let it come again. The warlords exchanged uncertain glances. The idea of change was not easy to accept, but neither was defeat. Finally, General Korak stepped forward. He had seen the battle himself. He had felt the power of the humans, and he knew the queen was right. He bowed his head. "What is your command, my queen?" Verexa exhaled. Her next words would shape the future of the empire. She looked at the council, at the warriors who had followed her into battle, and spoke with the voice of a ruler not just of war, but of wisdom. "We will rebuild," she said, "not as conquerors." She raised her head, but as something stronger.